KSJE and the Farmington Public Library present Cuentos Hahne and Tales.
My name is Alex Mrzlak. I'm with the Farmington Public Library, and today I'm going to be reading to you some fairy tales from the books Fairy Tales Every Child Should Know and Grimm's Fairy Tales. We're going to be starting with Puss in Boots. There was a miller who had 3 sons, and when he died, he divided what he possessed among them in the following manner. He gave his mill to the eldest, his donkey to the second, and his cat to the youngest. Each of the brothers accordingly took what belonged to him, without the help of an attorney, who would soon have brought their little fortune to nothing but law expenses. The poor young fellow who had nothing but the cat complained that he was hardly used. "My brothers," said he, "by joining their stocks together may do well in the world, but for me, when I have eaten my cat and made fur cap of his skin, I will soon die of hunger." The cat, who all this time sat listening just inside the door of a cupboard, now ventured to come out, and addressed him as follows. "Do not thus afflict yourself, my good master. You have only to give me a bag and a pair of boots, made just for me, so that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and then you shall see that you are not so ill provided for as you imagine." Though the cat's master did not much depend on these promises yet, as he had often observed the cunning tricks the cat used to catch rats and mice, such as hanging upon his hind legs and hiding in the meal to make believe that he was dead, he did not entirely despair of his being of some use to him in his unhappy condition. When the cat had obtained what he had asked for, he gaily began to equip himself. He drew on his boots, and putting a bag about his neck, he took hold of the strings with his paws, and bidding his master to take courage, immediately sallied forth. The first attempt the cat made was to go into the warren, which there was a great number of rabbits. He put some bran and some parsley into his bag, and then stretching himself out at full length as if he were dead, he waited for some young rabbits, who as yet knew nothing of the cunning tricks of the world, to come get into his bag. The better feast upon the dainties he had put into it, scarcely had lain down before he had succeeded as well as he could be wished. The giddy young rabbit crept into the bag, and the cat immediately drew the strings, and trapped him without mercy. The cat, proud of his prey, hastened directly to the palace, where he asked to speak to the king. On being shown the apartment of his majesty, he made a low bow and said, "I have brought you, sire, this rabbit from the warren of my lord the Marquis of Carabas, who commanded me to present it to your majesty with the assurance of his respect." "Tell my lord Marquis of Carabas," replied the king, "that I accept his presents with pleasure, and that I am greatly obliged to him." Soon after, the cat laid himself down in the same manner, in a field of corn this time, and had as much good fortune as before, for 2 fine partridges got into his bag, which he immediately killed and carried to the palace. The king received them as he had done the rabbit, and ordered his servants to give the messenger something to drink. In this manner he continued to carry presents of game to the king from my lord the Marquis of Carabas, at least once every week. One day, the cat, having heard that the king intended to take a ride that morning by the riverside with his daughter, who was the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, "If you will but follow my advice, your fortune is made. Take off your clothes and bathe yourself in the river, just in the place I shall show you, and then leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas did exactly as he was desired, without being able to guess at what the cat intended. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and Puss directly called out as loud as he could bawl, "Help! Help! My lord, the Marquis of Carabas, is drowning! My lord, the Marquis of Carabas, is in danger of being drowned!" The king, hearing the cries, put his head out the window of his carriage, to see what was the matter, when perceiving the very cat who had brought him so many presents, he ordered his attendants to go directly to the assistance of my lord Marquis of Carabas. While they were being employed in taking the Marquis out of the river, the cat ran to the king's carriage and told his majesty that while his master was bathing, some thieves had run off with his clothes, the cunning cat all this time having hid them under a large stone. The king, hearing this, commanded the officers of his wardrobe to fetch one of the handsomest suits it contained, and present it to the lord the Marquis of Carabas, at the same time loading him with 1,000 attentions. The fine clothes they brought him made him look like a gentleman, and set off his person, which was very comely, to the greatest advantage. The king's daughter was mightily taken with his appearance, and the Marquis of Carabas had no sooner cast upon her 2 or 3 respectful glances than she became violently in love with him. The king insisted on getting into the carriage and taking a ride with them. The cat, enchanted to see how well his scheme was likely to succeed, ran before to a meadow that was reaping, and said to the reapers, "Good people, if you do not tell the king, who will soon pass by this way, that the meadow you are reaping belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, then you shall be chopped as small as mincemeat." The king did not fail to ask the reapers to whom the meadow belonged, and they responded, "To my lord the Marquis of Carabas," all at once. "You have here a very fine piece of land, my lord Marquis," said the king. "Truly, sire," replied he, "it does not fail to bring me every year a plentiful harvest." The cat, who still went on before, now came to a field where some other labourers were making sheaves of corn as they had reaped, to whom he said, as before, "Good people, if you do not tell the king, who will presently pass this way, that the corn you have reaped in this field belongs to the Lord Marquis of Carabas, then you shall be chopped as small as mincemeat." The king accordingly passed a moment after, and inquired to whom the corn he saw belonged. "To my lord the Marquis of Carabas," they answered, very glibly, upon which the king again complimented the Marquis upon his noble possessions. The cat still continued to go as before, and gave the same charge to the people he met with, so that the king was greatly astonished at the splendid fortune of the Marquis of Carabas. Puss at length arrived at a stately castle which belonged to an ogre, the richest ever known, for all the lands the king had passed through and admired were his. The cat took care to learn every particular about the ogre, and what he could do, and then asked to speak with him, saying, as he entered the room in which he was, that he could not pass so near his castle without doing himself an honour to inquire after his health. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do, and desired him to be seated. "I have been informed," said the cat, "that you have the gift of changing yourself to all sorts of animals, a lion, or an elephant even." "This is true," replied the ogre, somewhat sternly, "and to convince you, I will directly take the form of a lion." The cat was so much terrified at finding himself so near a lion that he sprang from him and climbed to the roof of the house, but not without much difficulty, as his boots were not very fit to walk upon tiles. Some minutes after, the cat, perceiving that the ogre had quitted the form of a lion, ventured to come down from the tiles, and owned that he had been a good deal frightened. "I have been further informed," continued the cat, "but I know not how to believe it, that you have the power of taking form of the smallest animals also. For example, of changing yourself into a rat or a mouse, although I confess I should think this is impossible." The ogre stared at him. "Impossible? You shall see." And at the same instant he changed himself into a mouse, and began to frisk about the room. The cat no sooner had his eyes cast upon the ogre in this form, than he sprang upon him, and devoured him in an instant. In the meantime, the king, admiring as he came near it the magnificent castle of the ogre, ordered his attendants to drive up to the gates, as he wished to take a nearer view of it. The cat, hearing the noise of the carriage on the drawbridge, immediately came out, saying, "Your Majesty is welcome to the castle of my lord Marquis of Carabas." "And is this splendid castle yours also, my lord Marquis of Carabas?" "I have never seen anything more stately than the building, or more beautiful than the park and pleasure grounds around it. No doubt the castle is no less magnificent within than without. Pray, my lord Marquis, indulge me with the sight of it." The Marquis gave his hand to the young princess, and she alighted, and followed the king who went before. They entered a spacious hall where they found a splendid collection, which the ogre had prepared for some friends he had expected that day to visit him, but who, hearing that the king with the princess and a great gentleman of the court were within, had not dared to enter. The king was so much charmed with the amiable qualities and noble fortune of the Marquis of Carabas that the young princess, too, had fallen so violently in love with him, that when the king had partaken of the collation and drunk a few glasses of wine, and said to the Marquis, "It will be your own fault, my lord Marquis of Carabas, if you do not soon become my son-in-law." The Marquis received the intelligence with 1,000 respectful acknowledgments, accepted the honour conferred upon him, married the princess that very day. The cat became a great lord, and never ever ran after mice or rats again, except for his own amusement. These next stories are from the book Grimm's Fairy Tales. The first one is called The Frog Prince. One fine evening, a young princess went into a wood and sat down by the side of cool spring water. She had a golden ball in her hand, which was her favorite plaything, and she amused herself with tossing it into the air and catching it again as it fell. After a time, she threw it up so high that when she stretched out her hand to catch it, the ball bounded away and rolled upon the ground, till at last it fell into the spring. The princess looked into the spring after her ball, but it was very deep, so deep that she could not see the bottom of it. She began to lament her loss, weeping, and said, "Alas, if only I could get my ball again, I would give all my fine clothes and jewels, everything I have in the world." Whilst she was speaking, a frog put its head out of the water and said, "Princess, why do you weep so bitterly?" "Alas," said she, "what can you do for me, you nasty frog? My golden ball has fallen into the spring." The frog said, "I want not pearls, nor your jewels, or fine clothes. But if you will love me, and let me live with you, and eat from your little golden plate, and sleep upon your little bed, I will bring you your ball again." "What nonsense!" thought the princess. "This silly frog is talking. He can never get out of the well. However, he may be able to get my ball for me, and therefore I will promise him what he asks." So she said to the frog, "Well, if you will bring me my ball, I promise to do all you require." The frog put his head down and dived deep under the water, and after a little while he came up again with the ball in his mouth, and threw it onto the ground. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran to pick it up. She was so overjoyed to have it in her hand again, she didn't even think of the frog, but ran home with it as fast as she could. The frog called after her, "Stay, princess, stay and take me with you as you promised." But she did not stop or hear a word. The next day, just as the princess had sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise. A tap, tap, as if someone was coming up the marble staircase. And soon afterwards something knocked gently at the door, and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou I said, by fountain cool and greenwood shade." The princess ran to the door and opened it, and there she saw the frog, whom she had quite forgotten. She was terribly frightened, and shutting the door as fast as she could, came back to her seat. The king, her father, asked what had frightened her. "There's a nasty frog," said she, "at the door who lifted my ball out of the spring last evening. I promised him that he should live with me here, thinking that he could never get out of the spring, but there he is at the door, and he wants to come in." While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in greenwood shade." The king said to the young princess, "As you have made a promise, you must keep it, so go and let him in." She did so, and the frog hopped into the room, came close to the table. "Pray lift me upon a chair," said he to the princess, "and let me sit next to you." As soon as she had done this, the frog said, "Put your plate closer to me, that I may eat of it." This she did, and when he had eaten as much as he could, he said, "Now I am tired. Carry me upstairs and put me into your little bed." The princess took him up in her hand and put him upon her pillow of her own bed, where he slept all night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up, hopped downstairs, and went out of the house. "Now," thought the princess, "he is gone, and I shall be troubled with him no more." But she was mistaken, for when the night came again, she heard the same tap, tap, tapping at the door, and when she opened it, the frog came in, and slept upon her pillow, as before, till morning broke. And the third night he did the same, but when the princess awoke on the following morning, she was astonished to see, instead of the frog, a handsome prince gazing at her with the most beautiful eyes that were ever seen. And standing at the head of her bed, he told her that he had been enchanted by a malicious fairy who had changed him into the form of a frog, in which he was fated to remain until some princess should take him out of the spring and let him sleep upon her bed for 3 nights. "You," said the prince, "have broken this cruel charm, and now I have nothing to wish for but that you should go with me into my father's kingdom, where I will marry you, and love you as long as you live." The princess, you may be sure, was not long in giving her consent, and as soon as they spoke, a splendid carriage drove up, with 8 beautiful horses decked with plumes of feathers and golden harness. Behind rode the prince's servant, the faithful Henry, who had bewailed the misfortune of his dear master so long and so bitterly that his heart and willing burst. They all set out full of joy for the princess's kingdom, where they arrived safely and lived happily a great many years. The last story I'll be reading today is called The Elves and the Shoemaker. There once was a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest, but still he could not earn enough to live upon, and at last all he had in the world was gone, except just leather enough to make 1 more pair of shoes. He cut them all ready to make up the next day, meaning to get up early in the morning to work. His conscience was clear and his heart was light amidst all his troubles. So he went peaceably to bed and left all of his cares to heaven and fell asleep. The morning after he said his prayers, he sat himself down to his work, and to his great wonder, there stood the shoes, already made upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or to think of this strange event. He looked at the workmanship, not 1 false stitch in the whole job, and all was so neat and true, it was a complete masterpiece. That same day a customer came in, and the shoes pleased him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker with the money bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more in the evening. He cut out the work and went to bed early that he might get up and begin betimes next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up the next morning, the work was finished, ready to his hand. Presently in came buyers, who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought leather enough for 4 pairs more. He cut the work again overnight and found it finished in the morning just as before, and so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak, and the good man soon became thriving and prosperous again. One evening, about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight, that we may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked this thought, so they left a light burning and hid themselves in the corner of the room, behind a curtain that was hung up there, and watched what should happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came 2 little naked dwarfs, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to play with their little fingers, stitching and wrapping and tapping away, at such a rate that the shoemaker was all amazement. He could not take his eyes off for a moment. And on they went till the job was quite finished, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. There was long before daybreak, and they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker These little wights have made us rich, and we ought to be thankful for them, and do them good office in return. I am quite vexed to see them run about as they do. They have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I'll make each of them a shirt, and a coat, and a waistcoat, and a pair of pantaloons into the bargain. Do you make each of them a pair of little shoes?" The thought pleased the good shoemaker very much, and one evening, when all of the things were ready, they laid them out on the table instead of the work that they used to cut out. And they then went and hid themselves to watch the little elves would do. About midnight they came in, and were going to sit down to do their work as usual, but when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and were greatly delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about as merry as could be, till at last they danced out the door, over the green, and the shoemaker saw them no more. But everything went well with him from that time forward, as long as he lived. We're with the Farmington Public Library. We have lots of summer events, so don't forget to look on infoway.org. Thank you.
This has been Cuentos Hahne and Tales, presented by the Farmington Public Library and KSJE 90.9 FM.